You have a model you want to train with a big batch size because bigger batches make training smoother and more stable. But you hit run, and your GPU immediately throws an out-of-memory error because that batch simply will not fit. So do you give up on a large batch? Not at all. Gradient accumulation lets you get the exact effect of a huge batch while never holding more than a tiny one in memory at any moment. It is one of the most useful tricks for training big models on modest hardware, and the idea behind it is beautifully simple. Let's dig in. So how does accumulation actually work under the hood? Walk the loop one stage at a time. Start with a single small micro batch, tiny enough to fit comfortably in memory. You run it forward through the network to get a loss, then run the backward pass to compute its gradients. So far, this is exactly what ordinary training does on every step, nothing unusual yet. Here is the twist. Instead of immediately updating the weights, you add those gradients into a running buffer and leave the weights completely alone. Nothing moves yet. You're simply banking this micro batch's contribution and holding it, waiting to combine it with more before committing to any actual step. Then you repeat, pulling in the next micro batch, computing its gradients, and adding them onto the same buffer on top of what is already there. Do this for, say, 8 micro batches, and the buffer now holds the summed gradient of all 8, exactly as if you had processed one batch 8 times larger. Only after the final micro batch do you apply a single optimizer step using that accumulated gradient, then clear the buffer and begin again. Peak memory stayed at 1 micro batch the entire time because you never held all those activations at once. That is the whole beautiful trick. Why bother with all this bookkeeping? Here is the payoff laid side by side. Loading a giant batch all at once means holding every example's activations in memory simultaneously. On a large model, that peak demand blows straight past what your GPU physically has, and the run dies with an out-of-memory error before it can even take a single step. The batch size you wanted is simply off the table. Gradient accumulation delivers the same large effective batch by summing many small ones into a single virtual update. Mathematically, the result is almost identical to training on that one big batch. Yet the peak memory is only a single micro batch. You get the stability of a large batch on hardware that could never hold it directly. Boil it down, and 3 ideas capture accumulation completely. It sums gradients over several micro batches before updating. You run many small forward and backward passes, banking each one's gradient into a buffer, and only step the optimizer once after the whole group has been fully accumulated. It simulates a large batch within tiny memory. Because you never hold every activation at once, the peak footprint stays at a single micro batch, letting a modest GPU train as if it had the memory for a batch many times bigger. It trades extra time for the batch size you need. Running 8 micro batches, it sequentially takes roughly 8 times as long per update, so accumulation buys you the effective batch at the cost of slower wall clock training, which is usually a bargain. All right, let's lock in what matters. Gradient accumulation lets you train with a large effective batch size, even when only a small one fits in memory, by summing gradients across several micro batches. You run each micro batch forward and backward, add its gradients to a running buffer without stepping, and only after the last one apply a single optimizer step and reset. The result is mathematically almost identical to one big batch, but peak memory stays at a single micro batch at the cost of proportionally longer training time per update. Watch a few details. Scale the accumulated gradient by the number of steps, and remember batch normalization still only sees each micro batch. Hungry for more practical training tricks like this one? We break them down plainly all the time over at standarity.com. See you there.